Hey everyone, and welcome to something a bit weird. If you watched my last tech video, you might recall that I was given the idea to put a modern graphics card in this 2004 Pentium 4 computer by using a PCI adapter. The adapter in question was sold on AliExpress with the catchy name PCI to PCI Express X16 conversion card adapter, PXE8112 PCIe bridge expansion card, PCIe to PCI adapter. This cost 16 quid including shipping, and after waiting a couple of weeks, the adapter finally arrived. Although it looks a bit dodgy, it's designed to allow modern PCIe graphics cards to slot into older motherboards using the outdated conventional PCI standard. Before you ask, why didn't you just buy a cheap old AGP graphics card for this computer? Well, the motherboard has no AGP port, only 3 PCI slots. And I won't be buying an old PCI graphics card either because look at how expensive they are. So instead of spending so much money, I'll be taking my newly acquired NVIDIA Quadro P620, a PCIe graphics card from 2018, back out of my main computer and pairing it with the PCI adapter to allow it to slot into this old PC. Not only is this more cost effective, but this will provide excellent graphical performance on such an old computer, right? Well, I didn't really know what to expect. We'll get onto that in a bit. But what performance can this old PC offer right now? Well, it has an Intel Pentium 4 processor, as mentioned, clocked at 3 GHz, 2 GB of 400 MHz DDR RAM, a 40 GB IDE hard drive, and lastly, an integrated Intel Extreme Graphics 2 chip with 96 MB of VRAM and supports up to DirectX 7. Inevitably, this means you only get 20 FPS on average in 3D games that are around the same age as the computer, even when running in 480p resolution. And even 2D games can struggle, featuring low frame rates most of the time, and sprites turning into white boxes. And the cherry on top, it gets a score of 1.0 on the Windows Experience Index. Incredible. Of course, we can't be dealing with this mediocre performance, so let's get everything prepared to allow the modern graphics card to work in this old Pentium 4 computer. Straight away, you'll see it's running Windows 7 32-bit, because this OS generally runs alright on this computer, and it's the earliest operating system that's fully compatible with the graphics card, judging from info online. I'd also used Legacy Update to get updates installed ahead of time, including Service Pack 1, which gives things the best chance of working. And now it was time to download the video drivers to allow the card to work when put in the system. I went on my main computer and searched for driver files that would work on Windows 7 32-bit and downloaded 2 driver installers from the official NVIDIA website. I then copied them both to a USB drive, ejected it from my PC, and then put the drive in the old Pentium 4 PC to try installing the video drivers. Unfortunately, it turns out the card had to be present inside the PC or else the drivers would refuse to install. So you know what that means? It's time to shut the computer down and begin the madness right now. So here is the NVIDIA Quadro P620 graphics card from 2018, which I just removed from my main computer. This will be paired with a dodgy PCI adapter to allow it to slot into the old Pentium 4 computer. You can see that the card is simply meant to slot into the top of the adapter, with the video ports at the back still accessible in the gap on the bracket, if that makes sense. To allow the card to slot in properly, I needed to unscrew the bracket on the card. But after doing so, I still had trouble getting the card to fit properly, so I unscrewed the bracket from the adapter as well, allowing plenty of room to access the video ports. I found it difficult to slot the card into the adapter without it moving around. So instead, I just slotted the adapter into the PCI slot in the old computer, then tried aligning the card with the PCIe slot on the adapter, and then carefully but firmly tried pushing the card into the slot. It took some patience, and I did drop the card by accident. Oh, and I stupidly forgot to remove the bracket cover from the case. But after some patience and incompetence, the card properly slotted in place. As expected, it was extremely wobbly since there were no brackets securing either the card or the adapter itself. But again, this shouldn't be a problem if I'm careful and don't knock the computer while it's powered on. And that's even if it boots with this configuration. Now is the moment of truth. I didn't know what to expect here, but I plugged the computer back in accordingly. And here's my reaction to what happened next. Okay. The fan on the GPU is spinning. Oh my god, it's actually showing an image. Holy shit. It's literally logging into Windows. Wait, there's the GPU. Right, God, my hands are shaking so much. I just can't believe this. It's actually working. It's at least showing a picture when put through that PCI adapter. That is insane. Wow. Yes, you saw that right. No glitches, no explosions. The computer just powered on as if what I'd just done was completely normal. Windows even booted to the desktop, but with a terrible screen resolution. I was pleasantly surprised, but this is just the beginning. I needed to try sorting out the drivers next. While waiting for the installer to open, I checked out GPU-Z to see if the card was being recognised, and indeed it was. Well, aside from the name Standard VGA Graphics Adapter. This would be fixed once the drivers were sorted, but that's only if the installer could even detect the graphics card. Surprisingly though, it did, and the setup proceeded to just work. It took a few minutes, but it finished with no errors and asked for a reboot. After Windows finished booting, it was running in full 1080p HD resolution, and when it went to the desktop, it even had aero enabled. It was surprisingly smooth too. I did lower the resolution to 720p to allow things to be more readable on camera. And when opening GPU-Z again, the card was showing up properly with the correct name and specifications, aside from one thing, and that is the bus speed. You can see that it's running at PCIe 1.1, the slowest bandwidth possible on the PCIe standard. Let me briefly explain what's happening here. So when this graphics card is slotted in my main computer, it's supposed to run at the PCIe X16 3.0 standard, with a max theoretical bandwidth of 16,000 megabytes per second, equal to 16 gigabytes per second. Having such a high bandwidth is necessary for providing decent graphical performance when using 3D software, or of course, gaming. However, if we look at the bandwidth of 32-bit conventional PCI, which is what this old computer supports, the max bandwidth is a whopping 0.13 gigabytes per second, or 133 megabytes per second. This means that when using this graphics card through this PCI adapter, the bandwidth is reduced by over 99%, proving how terribly outdated the conventional PCI standard truly is, and also how far technology has evolved. Now you may understand what I meant earlier about being completely unsure about how the card will perform when paired with this adapter. But who knows, maybe we'll get surprisingly decent performance even in newer games. Did I mention that the card fully supports DirectX 11 even on Windows 7? But before getting too far ahead, I wanted to try launching something 3D to ensure everything was stable at least. So I opened Portal to begin with, a DirectX 9 title from 2007. Since it's a well-optimized game, the system requirements are lightweight for the time, requiring at least a Pentium 4 and 512 megabytes of RAM. You do need a GPU with at least 32 megabytes of VRAM and Pixel Shader 1.1 support. I loaded a new game with default settings and it ran at 60 FPS to begin with, but then quickly ran into issues when walking through portals, with the frame rate reducing to 30 FPS and just being less consistent overall. After getting MSI Afterburner to finally work by updating it to a later version, we can now get some clues to what could be causing issues with performance. The processor was doing fine most of the time, bouncing between 50 to 75% utilization on both threads. The RAM was also doing fine at 1.6 gigabytes usage, which is fine because the system has 2 gigabytes in total. So the problem is likely to do with the graphics card due to the awful PCI bandwidth. I'm also doubtful that the GPU utilization is accurate due to the bandwidth limitation. Let's come back to gaming a bit later and see how well the computer handles video playback. First, I tried out video playback on YouTube. Thankfully Google Chrome still works on Windows 7, although it no longer receives updates. You can still browse most websites, including YouTube, so I tried playing one of my videos in 720p 60 video quality. While the video did load, the 21-year-old Pentium 4 processor was struggling badly, maxing out at 100% load and causing stutter during playback. When looking at GPU-Z, the load on the graphics card was only at 8%. Even if this may be an inaccurate reading, I wouldn't really be surprised if the processor is the bottleneck here, and nothing to do with the card or PCI bandwidth. In the end, you're better off playing videos in 480p quality or lower for smoother playback. But how does it fare when playing H.265 video in a VLC media player? On my main computer, I used DaVinci Resolve to render a few minutes of Wipeout gameplay in 1080p 30fps using the H.265 video codec, something that doesn't normally play on older computers like this. But surprisingly, when opening this video on the old Pentium 4 computer, the playback was perfectly smooth, with the processor and card only at 20 to 25% usage each. There weren't any stutters or glitches, so it seems you can easily watch HD video in H.265 format on this computer, despite the low PCI bandwidth. Moving on to the more interesting part, benchmarking. During my testing, I ran plenty of gameplay and performance tests, each using different APIs, from DirectX 7 to 11 and OpenGL, to see what kind of performance would be achieved on this computer, having the card paired with the slow PCI interface. In theory, older games might perform extremely well, since they generally require less bandwidth as they're less detailed. As for newer games, well, we'll just have to see. I started off with some 3D Mark tests. First, here is 3D Mark 1001, which uses DirectX 8.1. When using default settings at 1024x768 resolution, we initially saw hundreds of FPS during the low detail car chase test. But on high detail, the frame rate would drop significantly, even falling below 20 FPS at times. This huge drop is likely caused by the terrible bandwidth, as mentioned earlier. Later, the high polygon count test also experienced poor frame rate. But aside from that, most other tests in this benchmark ran more than okay, in all fairness, often with hundreds of FPS. The final score in 3D Mark 1001 was 11,050 points. Not necessarily a bad score, but much lower than what it should have achieved. I will compare these results later. Next up was 3D Mark 03, using DirectX 9 this time, and set to 1024x768 resolution. Throughout the benchmark, it was clear that the frame rate was excellent whenever there wasn't much happening on screen. Otherwise, the frame rate would be less consistent, but nothing terrible really. But during the Mother Nature test, it started off fine for a second, and then fell apart completely whenever there was lots of grass and trees on screen, even reaching as low as 5 FPS. Meanwhile, other tests with less stuff happening would still achieve a decent frame rate, sometimes in the hundreds, like previously. The final score in 3D Mark 03 was 8,308. In 3D Mark 06, using DirectX 9 again, but with Shader Model 3.0 this time, and 1024x768 resolution, the performance overall was far worse, with the frame rate in the single digits pretty much throughout. This benchmark is much more intensive than the previous one, and again, needs a higher bandwidth, along with a better processor. Speaking of, both CPU tests ran at 0 FPS apparently, and took several minutes each to complete. Oh dear. The final score in 3D Mark 06 was a mediocre 1,860, with the CPU somehow getting the highest score out of anything else, bizarrely. The fourth and final graphical benchmark was 3D Mark 11, the latest version I could get running on this old computer and uses DirectX 11. When running this benchmark in performance mode at 720p HD resolution, it actually ran surprisingly smooth to begin with when showing the demos, at about 30 FPS, although it gradually got worse as more stuff started happening. Later, during the graphics test, the frame rate was surprisingly higher overall compared to the previous benchmark, seeing around 15 to 20 FPS, and even 30 FPS at times. However, the physics test was an absolute mess, running at about 1 to 2 FPS. Not because of the graphics card or slow bandwidth, but this time because of the age of the Pentium 4 processor. This test actually took over 5 minutes to complete, and I almost felt like falling asleep. The combined test at the end didn't fare much better either, taking a further 3.5 minutes to complete. After waiting a literal age for 3D Mark 11 to finish, the final score was 1608. So these results should give you an idea of just how bad the PCI bandwidth truly is, along with how poorly the Pentium 4 processor has aged. I'll compare these results with what the card should be scoring when paired with a modern computer at the end. But for some extra fun, I went ahead and tested some actual games, so let's quickly look at how they all performed. The first game I tested was Colin McRae Rally 2.0 from 2000, using DirectX 7 and with the silent patch installed to allow the game to launch on Windows 7. The game ran alright at 720p resolution with high detail even when multiple cars were present. However, the environment map and MIP map settings needed to be turned off to maintain 30 FPS on average, or else the performance would be considerably worse. Overall, it was playable with these settings, but it should have easily been able to run at 60 FPS in my opinion, considering this game came out in the year 2000. Still looks good for the time though. Next up is Robot Wars from 2002, using DirectX 8.1. Running the game in 1280 by 1024 resolution with graphical settings at highest resulted in 35 FPS, although it wasn't very consistent. It could run worse momentarily, or much better when you were facing the wall. Disabling shadows or setting a 30 FPS cap allowed for better performance overall. Moving on to games newer than the computer itself, here's Portal from 2007, properly tested this time, using DirectX 9 and running with the following settings shown on screen, at 1080p HD resolution. It averaged almost 60 FPS, but the performance was very inconsistent, where the frame rate could drop as low as 12 whenever you were placing portals or simply looking at them. It's worth noting that decreasing the resolution and graphics settings barely made any difference whatsoever. Next up is Portal 2 from 2011, also using DirectX 9. When running at 720p resolution with generally high settings and effect detail set to low, the game averaged 34 FPS, but struggled badly during the opening chapter, with the frame rate crumbling to around 12 FPS. After that though, the frame rate got much better but still had problems with consistency just like the previous game, hence why the average was just 34 FPS. Once again, turning graphical settings down didn't really make much of a difference at all. And now for something more intensive. This is the BeamNG tech demo from 2013, running in 1080p. Unfortunately, even with all graphical settings at lowest, the game couldn't run any higher than 11 FPS. This was likely because of the Pentium 4 processor this time, as it was stuck at 100% utilization throughout, and fiddling with graphical settings made no real difference to performance, even with higher detail being used, funnily enough. Still cool to see this game even running on a 2004 Pentium 4 computer. Now let's try some 2D stuff. Undertale from 2015, using DirectX 9, ran completely fine without an issue. Sometimes the frame rate would dip for a split second when entering a battle or going between rooms, but this wasn't a problem, meaning the game was fully playable. Angry Birds Seasons, using OpenGL 1.3, also ran fine for the most part, but weirdly had some random micro stutters throughout testing. This may have been because the Pentium 4 processor was stuck at 100% utilization from the second I started the game. No idea why the game was demanding so much from the processor, but it was still fully playable, so whatever. Finally, to finish off testing, here's Progress Bar 95 using OpenGL 2.1. This game released on Steam in 2020, and is the newest game I have that would run on this computer. Unfortunately, despite this game being fully 2D, the performance still suffered due to the old Pentium 4 processor, which was stuck at 100% utilization yet again. This meant the game averaged a very inconsistent 42 FPS. Major frame drops would also happen in between loading, which was probably caused by the slow old hard drive in this computer. For a laugh, I then downloaded OBS Studio to see if screen capture was possible. Once I added a display capture source, the entire computer slowed down to a crawl, with the preview showing at 12 FPS and windows duplicating themselves across the screen, even after setting the capture resolution to 240p. Despite these glaring issues, I tried opening BeamNG anyway, and here's what I managed to record. Hello guys, welcome to my BeamNG tech demo playthrough. Sorry I don't know how to control the camera properly, but I'm just going to crash straight into this thing. And you get to see the software and physics in action. Shocking. Look at the damage. Do the lights still work? Yes, and it still drives. Yeah, it goes without saying that this was shockingly terrible. But what does Windows 7 think about the overall performance of this computer, even with the horrendous performance bottleneck caused by the PCI adapter? Well, surprisingly, after running a Windows Experience Index performance test, the system scored 7.3 for gaming graphics, but with the overall score held back by the Windows Aero performance, which was 2.9. A bizarre result because Windows Aero performs just fine. But as we just saw, gaming performance is scattered all over the place, especially in newer titles. Finally, before finishing off, how much better is the NVIDIA Quadro P620 graphics card supposed to perform in a modern computer? Well, with the card slotted in my main PC, which has 16GB of DDR4 RAM and a Core i5 7th gen processor, the 3D Mark scores were massively improved, to the surprise of absolutely no one. This of course is because the card is running at the correct bandwidth and paired with an ideal processor this time. I mean, 3D Mark 1001 literally runs at 999 FPS. There were also performance differences in each game I tested, evident from the graph shown on screen. So, after all this waffle, I can conclude by saying you probably shouldn't try pairing a modern graphics card with a PCI adapter and putting it in an old Pentium 4 computer. Maybe the card would have performed a bit better when paired with a newer processor, for example, a Core 2 Quad from the late 2000s, but sadly I don't have an appropriate PC to test that right now. I think it was still awesome to see newer games running on this 21-year-old computer that otherwise wouldn't have run at all, even if the performance was awful due to the insane performance bottleneck of the PCI interface. Remember, the bandwidth is only 133 megabytes a second. I'd imagine that the PCI adapter is not designed for modern GPUs and instead supposed to be used with modern expansion cards like USB hubs or wireless cards. The low bandwidth would be far more suitable for something like that. In the end, the sensible thing to do is to get the NVIDIA Quadro P620 graphics card out of the Pentium 4 computer and just slot it back in my main PC and keep using it in that, which is what I've chosen to do after recording this video. Thankfully the card still works completely fine and the adapter hasn't screwed up in any way. This video has been loads of fun to work on, mostly because it's one of the strangest experiments I've ever done on a computer so far. I must thank Russell once again for this idea, otherwise this video wouldn't have happened. Also, I do have plans to swap out the motherboard in this computer to give it more potential for upgrades and expansions and stuff, but more info about that will come later, maybe in a future video or a community post, so stay tuned. For now, thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.